Chapter 1.48 How Gargantua set upon Picrochole within the rock Clermond, and utterly defeated the army of the said Picrochole. Gargantua had the charge of the whole army, and his father Grangousier stayed in his castle, who, encouraging them with good words, promised great rewards unto those that should do any notable service. Having thus set forward, as soon as they had gained the pass at the ford of Vede, with boats and bridges speedily made they passed over in a trice. Then considering the situation of the town, which was on a high and advantageous place, Gargantua thought fit to call his council, and pass that night in deliberation upon what was to be done. But Gymnast said unto him, My sovereign lord, such is the nature and complexion of the French, that they are worth nothing but at the first push. Then are they more fierce than devils. But if they linger a little and be wearied with delays, they'll prove more faint and remiss than women. My opinion is, therefore, that now presently, after your men have taken breath and some small refection, you give order for a resolute assault, and that we storm them instantly. His advice was found very good, and for effectuating thereof he brought forth his army into the plain field, and placed the reserves on the skirt or rising of a little hill. The monk took along with him 6 companies of foot and 200 horsemen well armed, and with great diligence crossed the marsh, and valiantly got upon the top of the green hillock even unto the highway which leads to Loudon. Whilst the assault was thus begun, Picrochole's men could not tell well what was best, to issue out and receive the assailants, or keep within the town and not to stir. Himself in the meantime, without deliberation, sallied forth in a rage with the cavalry of his guard, who were forthwith received and royally entertained with great cannon shot that fell upon them like hail from the high grounds on which the artillery was planted. Whereupon the Gargantuists betook themselves unto the valleys, to give the ordnance leave to play and range with the larger scope. Those of the town defended themselves as well as they could, but their shot passed over us without doing us any hurt at all. Some of Picrochole's men that had escaped our artillery set most fiercely upon our soldiers, but prevailed little. For they were all let in betwixt the files, and they're knocked down to the ground, which their fellow soldiers seeing, they would have retreated, but the monk having seized upon the pass by the which they were to return, they ran away and fled in all the disorder and confusion that could be imagined. Some would have pursued after them and followed the chase, but the monk withheld them, apprehending that in their pursuit the pursuers might lose their ranks, and so give occasion to the besieged to sally out of the town upon them. Then staying there some space and none coming against him, he sent the Duke Frontis to advise Gargantua to advance towards the hill upon the left hand, to hinder Picrochole's retreat at that gate, which Gargantua did with all expedition, and sent thither 4 brigades under the conduct of Sebest, which had no sooner reached the top of the hill, but they met Picrochole in the teeth, and those that were with him scattered. Then charged they upon them stoutly, yet were they much endamaged by those that were upon the walls, who galled them with all manner of shot, both from the great ordnance, small guns, and bows. Which Gargantua perceiving, he went with a strong party to their relief, and with his artillery began to thunder so terribly upon that canton of the wall, and so long, that all the strength within the town, to maintain and fill up the breach, was drawn thither. The monk seeing that quarter which he kept besieged void of men and competent guards, and in a manner altogether naked and abandoned, did most magnanimously on a sudden lead up his men towards the fort, and never left it till he had got up upon it, knowing that such as come to the reserve in a conflict bring with them always more fear and terror than those that deal about them with their hands in the fight. Nevertheless, he gave no alarm till all his soldiers had got within the wall, except the 200 horsemen, whom he left without to secure his entry. Then did he give a most horrible shout, so did all these who were with him, and immediately thereafter, without resistance, putting to the edge of the sword the guard that was at that gate, they opened it to the horsemen, with whom most furiously they altogether ran towards the east gate, where all the hurly-burly was, and coming close upon them in the rear overthrew all their forces. The besieged, seeing that the Gargantuists had won the town upon them, and that they were like to be secure in no corner of it, submitted themselves unto the mercy of the monk, and asked for quarter, which the monk very nobly granted to them, yet made them lay down their arms. Then, shutting them up within churches, gave order to seize upon all the staves of the crosses, and placed men at the doors to keep them from coming forth. Then opening that east gate, he issued out to succor and assist Gargantua. But Picrochole, thinking it had been some relief coming to him from the town, adventured more forwardly than before, and was upon the giving of a most desperate home charge, when Gargantua cried out, "Ha, Friar John, my friend Friar John, you are come in a good hour." Which unexpected accident so affrighted Picrochole and his men, that, giving all for lost, they betook themselves to their heels, and fled on all hands. Gargantua chased them till they came near to Vaugaudry, killing and slaying all the way, and then sounded the retreat. Chapter 1.49. How Picrochole in his flight fell into great misfortunes, and what Gargantua did after the battle. Picrochole thus in despair fled towards the Bouchard Island, and in the way to Riviere his horse stumbled and fell down, whereat he on a sudden was so incensed, that he with his sword without more ado killed him in his collar. Then, not finding any that would remount him, he was about to have taken an ass at the mill that was thereby. But the miller's men did so baste his bones, and so soundly bethwack him, that they made him both black and blue with strokes. Then stripping him of all his clothes, gave him a scurvy old canvas jacket, wherewith to cover his nakedness. Thus went along this poor choleric wretch, who, passing the water at Port Huelks, and relating his misadventurous disasters, was foretold by an old Lerpidan hag that his kingdom should be restored to him at the coming of the Cocklicranes, which she called Cockwissigrews. What has become of him since we cannot certainly tell, yet was I told that he is now a porter at Lyon, as testy and pettish in humour as ever he was before, and would be always with great lamentation inquiring at all strangers of the coming of the Cocklicranes, expecting assuredly, according to the old woman's prophecy, that at their coming he shall be re-established in his kingdom. The first thing Gargantua did after his return into the town was to call the muster roll of his men, which when he had done, he found that there were very few either killed or wounded, only some few foot of Captain Talmere's company, and Panocrates, who was shot with a musket ball through the doublet. Then he caused them all at, and in their several posts and divisions, to take a little refreshment, which was very plenteously provided for them in the best drink and victuals that could be had for money, and gave order to the treasurers and commissaries of the army to pay for and defray that repast, and that there should be no outrage at all nor abuse committed in the town, seeing it was his own. And furthermore commanded, that immediately after the soldiers had done with eating and drinking for that time sufficiently, and to their own hearts' desire, a gathering should be beaten for bringing them all together, to be drawn up on the piazza before the castle, there to receive 6 months' pay completely. All which was done. After this, by his direction, were brought before him in the said place all those that remained of Picrochole's party, unto whom, in the presence of the princes, nobles, and officers of his court and army, he spoke as followeth. Chapter 1.5. Gargantua's speech to the vanquished. Our forefathers and ancestors of all times have been of this nature and disposition, that, upon the winning of a battle, they have chosen rather, for a sign and memorial of their triumphs and victories, to erect trophies and monuments in the hearts of the vanquished by clemency than by architecture in the lands which they had conquered. For they did hold in greater estimation the lively remembrance of men purchased by liberality than the dumb inscription of arches, pillars, and pyramids, subject to the injury of storms and tempests, and to the envy of everyone. You may very well remember of the courtesy which by them was used towards the Bretons in the battle of Saint Aubin of Cormier, and at the demolishing of Parthenay. You have heard, and hearing admire, their gentle comportment towards those at the barriers, the barbarians of Spaniola, who had plundered, wasted, and ransacked the maritime borders of Allone and Thalmondois. All this hemisphere of the world was filled with the praises and congratulations which yourselves and your fathers made, when Alphobal, king of Cannar, not satisfied with his own fortunes, did most furiously invade the land of Onyx, and with cruel piracies molest all the Armoric islands and confine regions of Brittany. Yet was he in a set naval fight justly taken and vanquished by my father, whom God preserve and protect. But what? Whereas other kings and emperors, yea, those who entitle themselves Catholics, would have dealt roughly with him, kept him a close prisoner, and put him to an extreme high ransom. He entreated him very courteously, lodged him kindly with himself in his own palace, and out of his incredible mildness and gentle disposition sent him back with a safe conduct, laden with gifts, laden with favors, laden with all offices of friendship. What fell out upon it? Being returned into his country, he called a parliament, where all the princes and states of his kingdom being assembled, he showed them the humanity which he had found in us, and therefore wished them to take such course by way of compensation therein, as that the whole world might be edified by the example, as well of their honest graciousness to us as of our gracious honesty towards them. The result hereof was, that it was voted and decreed by an unanimous consent, that they should offer up entirely their lands, dominions, and kingdoms, to be disposed of by us according to our pleasure. Affable in his own person presently returned with 9,038 great ships of burden, bringing with him the treasures, not only of his house and royal lineage, but almost of all the country besides. For he embarking himself to set sail with a west-northeast wind, everyone in heaps did cast into the ship gold, silver, rings, jewels, spices, drugs, and aromatical perfumes, parrots, pelicans, monkeys, civet cats, black-spotted weasels, porcupines, and sea. He was accounted no good mother's son that did not cast in all the rare and precious things he had. Being safely arrived, he came to my said father, and would have kissed his feet. That action was found too submissively low, and therefore was not permitted, but in exchange he was most cordially embraced. He offered his presents. They were not received because they were too excessive. He yielded himself voluntarily a servant and vassal, and was content his whole posterity should be liable to the same bondage. This was not accepted of because it seemed not equitable. He surrendered, by virtue of the decree of his great parliamentary council, his whole countries and kingdoms to him, offering the deed and conveyance, signed, sealed, and ratified by all those that were concerned in it. This was altogether refused, and the parchments cast into the fire. In end, this free goodwill and simple meaning of the Canarians wrought such tenderness in my father's heart that he could not abstain from shedding tears, and wept most profusely. Then, by choice words very congruously adapted, strove in what he could to diminish the estimation of the good offices which he had done them, saying that any courtesy he had conferred upon them was not worth a rush, and what favor soever he had showed them he was bound to do it. But so much the more did Affable augment the repute thereof. What was the issue? Whereas for his ransom, in the greatest extremity of rigor and most tyrannical dealing, could not have been exacted above 20 times 100,000 crowns, and his eldest sons detained as hostages till that sum had been paid, they made themselves perpetual tributaries, and obliged to give us every year 2 millions of gold at 24 carats fine. The first year we received the whole sum of 2 millions. The second year of their own accord they paid freely to us 23,000 crowns. The third year, 26,000. The fourth year, 3 millions, and do so increase it always out of their own good will, that we shall be constrained to forbid them to bring us any more. This is the nature of gratitude and true thankfulness. For time, which gnaws and diminisheth all things else, augments and increaseth benefits, because a noble action of liberality, done to a man of reason, doth grow continually by his generous thinking of it and remembering it. Being unwilling therefore any way to degenerate from the hereditary mildness and clemency of my parents, I do now forgive you, deliver you from all fines and imprisonments, fully release you, set you at liberty, and every way make you as frank and free as ever you were before. Moreover, at your going out of the gate, you shall have every one of you 3 months, pay to bring you home into your houses and families, and shall have a safe convoy of 600 cuirassiers and 8,000 foot under the conduct of Alexander, esquire of my body, that the clubmen of the country may not do you any injury. God be with you. I am sorry from my heart that Picrochole is not here, for I would have given him to understand that this war was undertaken against my will, and without any hope to increase either my goods or renown. But seeing he is lost, and that no man can tell where nor how he went away, it is my will that his kingdom remain entire to his son, who, because he is too young, he not being yet full 5 years old, shall be brought up and instructed by the ancient princes and learned men of the kingdom. and because a realm thus desolate may easily come to ruin, if the covetousness and avarice of those who by their places are obliged to administer justice in it be not curbed and restrained, I ordain and will have it so, that Ponocrates be overseer and superintendent above all his governors, with whatever power and authority is requisite thereto, and that he be continually with the child, until he find him able and capable to rule and govern by himself. Now I must tell you that you are to understand how a too feeble and dissolute facility in pardoning evildoers giveth them occasion to commit wickedness afterwards more readily, upon this pernicious confidence of receiving favor. I consider that Moses, the meekest man that was in his time upon the earth, did severely punish the mutinous and seditious people of Israel. I consider likewise that Julius Caesar, who was so gracious an emperor that Cicero said of him that his fortune had nothing more excellent than that he could, and his virtue nothing better than that he would always save and pardon every man he, notwithstanding all this, did in certain places most rigorously punish the authors of rebellion. After the example of these good men, it is my will and pleasure that you deliver over unto me before you depart hence. First, that fine fellow Marque, who was the prime cause, origin, and groundwork of this war by his vain presumption and overweening. Secondly, his fellow cake bakers, who were neglective in checking and reprehending his idle harebrained humor in the instant time. And lastly, all the counselors, captains, officers, and domestics of Picrochole, who had been incendiaries or fomenters of the war by provoking, praising, or counseling him to come out of his limits thus to trouble us. Chapter 1.51 How the victorious Gargantuists were recompensed after the battle. When Gargantua had finished his speech, the seditious men whom he required were delivered up unto him, except Swashbuckler, Dirttail, and Smalltrash, who ran away 6 hours before the battle, one of them as far as to Laniel Neck at one course, another to the valley of Vire, and the third even unto Logrine, without looking back or taking breath by the way unto of the cake bakers who were slain in the fight. Gargantua did them no other hurt, but that he appointed them to pull at the presses of his printing house, which he had newly set up. Then those who died there he caused to be honorably buried in Blacksoil Valley and Burnhag Field, and gave order that the wounded should be dressed and had care of in his great hospital or nosicum. After this, considering the great prejudice done to the town and its inhabitants, he reimbursed their charges and repaired all the losses that by their confession upon oath could appear they had sustained. And, for their better defense and security in times coming against all sudden uproars and invasions, commanded a strong citadel to be built there with a competent garrison to maintain it. At his departure, he did very graciously thank all the soldiers of the brigades that had been at this overthrow, and sent them back to their winter quarters in their several stations and garrisons, the Decumane Legion only excepted, whom in the field on that day he saw do some great exploit, and their captains also, whom he brought along with himself unto Grangasir. At the sight and coming of them, the good man was so joyful that it is not possible fully to describe it. He made them a feast the most magnificent, plentiful, and delicious that ever was seen since the time of the king Ahasuerus. At the taking up of the table he distributed amongst them his whole cupboard of plate, which weighed 800,014 bezants. Each bezant is worth 5 pounds English money. Of gold, in great antique vessels, huge pots, large basins, big tasses, cups, goblets, candlesticks, comfit boxes, and other such plate, all of pure massy gold, besides the precious stones, enameling, and workmanship, which by all men's estimation was more worth than the matter of the gold. Then unto every one of them out of his coffers caused he to be given the sum of 1,200,000 crowns, ready money. And further, he gave to each of them for ever and in perpetuity, unless he should happen to decease without heirs, such castles and neighboring lands of his as were most commodious for them. To Ponocrates he gave the rock Clermont, to Gymnast, the Cowdray, to Eudaemon Montpensier, Rivaux to Talmere, to Ithobal Montsoreau, to Acamas, Cand, Varens to Chironacti, Gravat to Sebest, Quinquinize to Alexander, Leger to Sophron, and so of his other places. Chapter 1.52 How Gargantua caused to be built for the monk the Abbey of the Lime. There was left only the monk to provide for, whom Gargantua would have made abbot of Seville, but he refused it. He would have given him the abbey of Burgil or of Sanct Florent, which was better, or both, if it pleased him. But the monk gave him a very peremptory answer, that he would never take upon him the charge nor government of monks. For how shall I be able, said he, to rule over others that have not full power and command of myself? If you think I have done you, or may hereafter do any acceptable service, give me leave to found an abbey after my own mind and fancy. The motion pleased Gargantua very well, who thereupon offered him all the country of the Lime by the river of Loire, till within 2 leagues of the great forest of Port-Hualx. The monk then requested Gargantua to institute his religious order contrary to all others. First, then, said Gargantua, you must not build a wall about your convent, for all other abbeys are strongly walled and mured about. See, said the monk, and not without cause, seeing wall and mur signify but one and the same thing. Where there is mur before and mur behind, there is store of murmur, envy, and mutual conspiracy. Moreover, seeing there are certain convents in the world whereof the custom is, if any woman come in, I mean chaste and honest women, they immediately sweep the ground which they have trod upon. Therefore was it ordained, that if any man or woman entered into religious orders should by chance come within this new abbey, all the rooms should be thoroughly washed and cleansed through which they had passed. And because in all other monasteries and nunneries all is compassed, limited, and regulated by hours, it was decreed that in this new structure there should be neither clock nor dial, but that according to the opportunities and incident occasions all their hours should be disposed of. For, said Gargantua, the greatest loss of time that I know is to count the hours. What good comes of it? Nor can there be any greater dotage in the world than for one to guide and direct his courses by the sound of a bell, and not by his own judgment and discretion. Item, because at that time they put no women into nunneries, but such as were either purblind, blinkards, lame, crooked, ill-favored, misshapen fools, senseless, spoiled, or corrupt. Nor encloistered any men but those that were either sickly, subject to defluxions, ill-bred louts, simple sots, or peevish trouble-houses. But to the purpose, said the monk. A woman that is neither fair nor good, to what use serves she? To make a nun of, said Gargantua. Yea, said the monk, and to make shirts and smocks. Therefore was it ordained that into this religious order should be admitted no women that were not fair, well-featured, and of a sweet disposition, nor men that were not comely, personable, and well-conditioned. Item, because in the convents of women men come not but underhand, privily, and by stealth, it was therefore enacted that in this house there shall be no women in case there be not men, nor men in case there be not women. Item, because both men and women that are received into religious orders after the expiring of their novitiate or probation year were constrained and forced perpetually to stay there all the days of their life. It was therefore ordered that all whatever, men or women, admitted within this abbey, should have full leave to depart with peace and contentment, whensoever it should seem good to them so to do. Item, for that the religious men and women did ordinarily make 3 vows, to wit, those of chastity, poverty, and obedience. It was therefore constituted and appointed that in this convent they might be honorably married, that they might be rich and live at liberty. In regard of the legitimate time of the persons to be initiated, and years under and above which they were not capable of reception, the women were to be admitted from 10 till 15, and the men from 12 till 18. Chapter 1.53. How the Abbey of the Thelemites was built and endowed. For the fabric and furniture of the Abbey Gargantua caused to be delivered out in ready money 7,200,000, 831 of those golden rams of Bari, which have a sheep stamped on the one side and a flowered cross on the other. And for every year, until the whole work were completed, he allotted 69,000 crowns of the sun, and as many of the 7 stars, to be charged all upon the receipt of the custom. For the foundation and maintenance thereof forever, he settled a perpetual fee-farm rent of 2300, 69,514 rose nobles, exempted from all homage, fealty, service, or burden whatsoever, and payable every year at the gate of the abbey. And of this by letters patent passed a very good grant. The architecture was in a figure hexagonal, and in such a fashion that in every one of the 6 corners there was built a great round tower of 80 foot in diameter, and were all of a like form and bigness. Upon the north side ran along the river of Loire, on the bank whereof was situated the tower called Arctic. Going towards the east, there was another called Calair, the next following Anatole, the next Messembrine, the next Hesperia, and the last Crier. Every tower was distant from other the space of 312 paces. The whole edifice was everywhere 6 stories high, reckoning the cellars underground for one. The second was arched after the fashion of a basket handle. The rest were sealed with pure wainscot, flourished with Flanders fretwork in the form of the foot of a lamp, and covered above with fine slates, with an endorsement of lead, carrying the antique figures of little puppets and animals of all sorts, notably well suited to one another, and gilt together with the gutters, which, jutting without the walls from betwixt the crossbars in a diagonal figure, painted with gold and azure, reached to the very ground, where they ended into great conduit pipes, which carried all away unto the river from under the house. This same building was 100 times more sumptuous and magnificent than ever was Bonnevet, Chamberg, or Chantilly. For there were in it 9,332 chambers, every one whereof had a withdrawing room, a handsome closet, a wardrobe, an oratory, and neat passage, leading into a great and spacious hall. Between every tower in the midst of the said body of building there was a pair of winding, such as we now call lantern stairs, whereof the steps were part of porphyry, which is a dark red marble spotted with white, part of Numidian stone, which is a kind of yellowishly streaked marble upon various colors, and part of serpentine marble, with light spots on a dark green ground, each of those steps being 22 foot in length and 3 fingers thick. And the just number of 12 betwixt every rest, or, as we now term it, landing place. In every resting place were 2 fair antique arches where the light came in, and by those they went into a cabinet, made even with and of the breadth of the said winding, and the rescending above the roofs of the house ended conically in a pavilion. By that vice or winding they entered on every side into a great hall, and from the halls into the chambers. From the Arctic tower unto the crier were the fair great libraries in Greek, Latin, Hebrew, French, Italian, and Spanish, respectively distributed in their several cantons, according to the diversity of these languages. In the midst there was a wonderful scalier or winding stair, the entry whereof was without the house, in a vault or arch 6 fathom broad. It was made in such symmetry and largeness that 6 men-at-arms with their lances in their rests might together in a breast ride all up to the very top of all the palace. From the tower Anatole to the Messembrine were fair spacious galleries, all colored over and painted with the ancient prowesses, histories, and descriptions of the world. In the midst thereof there was likewise such another ascent, and gate, as we said there was on the riverside. Upon that gate was written in great antique letters that which followeth. Chapter 1.54. The inscription, set upon the great gate of the Leme. Here enter not vile bigots, hypocrites, externally devoted apes, base snits, puffed up, wry-necked beasts, worse than the Huns or Ostrogoths, forerunners of baboons, cursed snakes, dissembled varlets, seeming sanct, slipshod Caffords, beggars pretending wants, fat chuffcats, smell-feast knockers, doltish gulls, outstrouting clusterfists, contentious bulls, fomenters of divisions and debates. Elsewhere, not here, make sale of your deceits. Your filthy trumperies stuffed with pernicious lies, not worth a bubble, would do but trouble our earthly paradise, your filthy trumperies. Here enter not attorneys, barristers, nor bridle-champing law practitioners, clerks, commissaries, scribes, nor Pharisees, willful disturbers of the people's ease, judges, destroyers with an unjust breath, of honest men like dogs even unto death. Your salary is at the gibbet-foot, go drink there. For we do not here fly out on those excessive courses, which may draw a waiting on your courts by suits in law. Lawsuits, debates, and wrangling hence are exiled, and jangling. Here we are very frolic and merry, and free from all entangling, lawsuits, debates, and wrangling. Here enter not base-pinching usurers, pelflickers, everlasting gatherers, gold graspers, coin-gripers, gulpers of mists, niggish deformed sots, who, though your chests vast sums of money should to you afford, would ne'ertheless add more unto that hoard, and yet not be content, you clunch-fist dastards, insatiable fiends, and Pluto's bastards, greedy devourers, chitchy sneakbull rogues, hell mastiffs gnaw your bones, you ravenous dogs. You beastly-looking fellows, reason doth plainly tell us that we should not to you allot room here, but at the gallows, you beastly-looking fellows. Here enter not fond makers of demurs in love adventures, peevish, jealous curs, sad pensive dotards, raisers of garbles, hags, goblins, ghosts, firebrands of household broils, nor drunkards, liars, cowards, cheaters, clowns, thieves, cannibals, faces o'ercast with frowns, nor lazy slugs, envious, covetous, nor blockish, cruel, nor too credulous. Here mangy, pocky folk shall have no place, no ugly lusks, nor persons of disgrace. Grace, honor, praise, delight, here sojourn day and night. Sound bodies lined with a good mind, do here pursue with might grace, honor, praise, delight. Here enter you, and welcome from our hearts all noble sparks, endowed with gallant parts. This is the glorious place, which bravely shall afford wherewith to entertain you all. Were you 1,000, here you shall not want for anything, for what you'll ask will grant. Stay here, you lively, jovial, handsome, brisk, gay, witty, frolic, cheerful, merry, frisk, spruce, jocund, courteous furtherers of trades, and, in a word, all worthy gentle blades. Blades of heroic breasts shall taste here of the feasts, both privily and civilly of the celestial guests, blades of heroic breasts. Here enter you, pure, honest, faithful, true expounders of the scriptures old and new, whose glosses do not blind our reason, but make it to see the clearer, and who shut its passages from hatred, avarice, pride, factions, covenants, and all sort of vice. Come, settle here a charitable faith, which neighborly affection nourisheth, and whose light chaseth all corrupters hence of the blessed word, from the aforesaid sense. The holy sacred word may it always afford us all in common, both man and woman, a spiritual shield and sword, the holy sacred word. Here enter you all ladies of high birth, delicious, stately, charming, full of mirth, ingenious, lovely, miniard proper, fair, magnetic, graceful, splendid, pleasant, rare, obliging, sprightly, virtuous, young, salacious, kind, neat, quick, feet, bright, compt, ripe, choice, dear, precious. Alluring, courtly, comely, fine, complete, wise, personable, ravishing, and sweet, come joys in joy. The Lord Celestial hath given enough wherewith to please us all. Gold give us, God forgive us, and from all woes relieve us, that we the treasure may reap of pleasure, and shun whate'er is grievous, gold give us, God forgive us. Chapter 1.55. What manner of dwelling the Thelemites had. In the middle of the lower court there was a stately fountain of fair alabaster. Upon the top thereof stood the 3 Graces, with their cornucopias or horns of abundance, and did jet out the water at their breasts, mouth, ears, eyes, and other open passages of the body. The inside of the buildings in this lower court stood upon great pillars of chalcedony stone and porphyry marble, made archways after a goodly antique fashion. Within those were spacious galleries, long and large, adorned with curious pictures, the horns of bucks and unicorns, with rhinoceroses, water horses called hippopotames, the teeth and tusks of elephants, and other things well worth the beholding. The lodging of the ladies, for so we may call those gallant women, took up all from the tower Arctic unto the gate Messembrine. The men possessed the rest. Before the said lodging of the ladies, that they might have their recreation, between the 2 first towers on the outside were placed the tilt-yard, the barriers or lists for tournaments, the hippodrome or riding court, the theatre or public playhouse, and natatory or place to swim in, with most admirable baths in 3 stages, situated above one another, well furnished with all necessary accommodation and store of myrtle water. By the riverside was the fair garden of pleasure, and in the midst of that, the glorious labyrinth. Between the 2 other towers were the courts for the tennis and the balloon. Towards the tower crier stood the orchard full of all fruit trees, set and ranged in a quincuntial order. At the end of that was the great park, abounding with all sort of venison. Betwixt the 3rd couple of towers were the butts and marks for shooting with a snapwork gun, an ordinary bow for common archery, or with a crossbow. The office houses were without the tower Hesperia, of 1 story high. The stables were beyond the offices, and before them stood the falconry, managed by ostrich keepers and falconers very expert in the art, and it was yearly supplied and furnished by the Candians, Venetians, Sarmates, now called Muscovitters, with all sorts of most excellent hawks, eagles, gerfalcons, goshawks, sackers, lanners, falcons, sparrowhawks, marlins, and other kinds of them, so gentle and perfectly well manned, that, flying of themselves sometimes from the castle for their own disport. They would not fail to catch whatever they encountered. The venery, where the beagles and hounds were kept, was a little farther off, drawing towards the park. All the halls, chambers, and closets or cabinets were richly hung with tapestry and hangings of divers sorts, according to the variety of the seasons of the year. All the pavements and floors were covered with green cloth. The beds were all embroidered. In every back chamber or withdrawing room, there was a looking-glass of pure crystal set in a frame of fine gold, garnished all about with pearls, and was of such greatness that it would represent to the full the whole lineaments and proportion of the person that stood before it. At the going out of the halls which belonged to the ladies' lodgings were the perfumers and trimmers through, whose hands the gallants passed when they were to visit the ladies. Those sweet artificers did every morning furnish the ladies' chambers with the spirit of roses, orange flower water, and angelica, and to each of them gave a little precious casket vaporing forth the most odoriferous exhalations of the choicest aromatical scents. Chapter 1.56. How the men and women of the religious order of the Leam were apparelled. The ladies at the foundation of this order were apparelled after their own pleasure and liking. But since that of their own accord and free will they have reformed themselves, their accoutrement is in manner as followeth. They wore stockings of scarlet crimson or ingrained purple dye, which reached just 3 inches above the knee, having a list beautified with exquisite embroideries and rare incisions of the cutter's art. Their garters were of the color of their bracelets, and circled the knee a little both over and under. Their shoes, pumps, and slippers were either of red, violet, or crimson velvet, pinked and jagged like lobster wattles. Next to their smock they put on the pretty kirtle or vasquin of pure silk camlet. Above that went the taffety or tabby farthingale, of white, red, tawny, gray, or of any other color. Above this taffety petticoat they had another of cloth of tissue or brocade, embroidered with fine gold and interlaced with needlework, or as they thought good, and according to the temperature and disposition of the weather had their upper coats of satin damask or velvet, and those either orange, tawny, green, ash-colored, blue, yellow, bright red, crimson, or white, and so forth. Or had them of cloth of gold, cloth of silver, or some other choice stuff, enriched with pearl, or embroidered according to the dignity of the festival days and times wherein they wore them. Their gowns, being still correspondent to the season, were either of cloth of gold frizzled with a silver-raised work, of red satin covered with gold pearl, of tabby or taffety, white, blue, black, tawny, and sea of silk serge, silk camlet, velvet, cloth of silver, silver tissue, cloth of gold, gold wire, figured velvet, or figured satin tinseled and overcast with golden threads, in divers variously purfled draughts. In the summer some days, instead of gowns, they wore light handsome mantles, made either of the stuff of the aforesaid attire, or like marresso rugs, of violet velvet frizzled, with a raised work of gold upon silver pearl, or with a knotted cord work of gold embroidery, everywhere garnished with little Indian pearls. They always carried a fair panache, or plume of feathers, of the color of their muff, bravely adorned and tricked out with glistering spangles of gold. In the winter time they had their taffety gowns of all colors, as above named, and those lined with the rich furrings of hindwolves, or speckled lynxes, black-spotted weasels, martlet skins of Calabria, sables, and other costly furs of an inestimable value. Their beads, rings, bracelets, collars, carcanets, and neck chains were all of precious stones, such as carbuncles, rubies, balaeus, diamonds, sapphires, emeralds, turquoises, garnets, agates, beryls, and excellent margarites. Their head-dressing also varied with the season of the year, according to which they decked themselves. In winter it was of the French fashion, in the spring of the Spanish, in summer of the fashion of Tuscany, except only upon the holy days and Sundays, at which times they were accoutred in the French mode, because they accounted it more honorable and better befitting the garb of a matronal pudicity. The men were apparelled after their fashion. Their stockings were of tamine or of cloth serge, of white, black, scarlet, or some other ingrained color. Their breeches were of velvet, of the same color with their stockings, or very near, embroidered and cut according to their fancy. Their doublet was of cloth of gold, of cloth of silver, of velvet, satin, damask, taffeties, and sea, of the same colors, cut, embroidered, and suitably trimmed up in perfection. The points were of silk of the same colors, the tags were of gold well enameled. Their coats and jerkins were of cloth of gold, cloth of silver, gold, tissue or velvet embroidered, as they thought fit. Their gowns were every whit as costly as those of the ladies. Their girdles were of silks, of the color of their doublets. Every one had a gallant sword by his side, the hilt and handle whereof were gilt, and the scabbard of velvet, of the color of his breeches, with a chape of gold, and pure goldsmith's work. The dagger was of the same. Their caps or bonnets were of black velvet, adorned with jewels and buttons of gold. Upon that they wore a white plume, most prettily and minion-like parted by so many rows of gold spangles, at the end whereof hung dangling in a more sparkling resplendency fair rubies, emeralds, diamonds, and sea. But there was such a sympathy betwixt the gallants and the ladies, that every day they were apparelled in the same livery. And that they might not miss, there were certain gentlemen appointed to tell the youths every morning what vestments the ladies would on that day wear. For all was done according to the pleasure of the ladies. In these so handsome clothes, and habiliments so rich, think not that either one or other of either sex did waste any time at all. For the masters of the wardrobes had all their raiments and apparel so ready for every morning, and the chamber ladies so well skilled, that in a trice they would be dressed, and completely in their clothes from head to foot. And to have those accoutrements with the more conveniency, there was about the wood of the Leam a row of houses of the extent of half a league, very neat and cleanly, wherein dwelt the goldsmiths, lapidaries, jewelers, embroiderers, tailors, gold drawers, velvet weavers, tapestry makers, and upholsterers, who wrought there every one in his own trade, and all for the aforesaid jolly friars and nuns of the new stamp. They were furnished with matter and stuff from the hands of the Lord Nausiclete, who every year brought them 7 ships from the Perlas and Cannibal Islands, laden with ingots of gold, with raw silk, with pearls and precious stones. And if any Margarites, called unions, began to grow old and lose somewhat of their natural whiteness and luster, those with their art they did renew by tendering them to eat to some pretty cocks, as they used to give casting unto hawks. Chapter 1.57 How that the Lemnites were governed, and of their manner of living. All their life was spent not in laws, statutes, or rules, but according to their own free will and pleasure. They rose out of their beds when they thought good. They did eat, drink, labor, sleep, when they had a mind to it and were disposed for it. None did awake them, none did offer to constrain them to eat, drink, nor to do any other thing, for so had Gargantua established it. In all their rule and strictest tie of their order, there was but this one clause to be observed. Do what thou wilt. Because men that are free, well-born, well-bred, and conversant in honest companies, have naturally an instinct and spur that prompteth them unto virtuous actions, and withdraws them from vice, which is called honor. Those same men, when by base subjection and constraint they are brought under and kept down, turn aside from that noble disposition by which they formerly were inclined to virtue, to shake off and break that bond of servitude wherein they are so tyrannously enslaved. For it is agreeable with the nature of man to long after things forbidden, and to desire what is denied us. By this liberty they entered into a very laudable emulation, to do all of them what they saw did please one. If any of the gallants or ladies should say, Let us drink, they would all drink. If any one of them said, Let us play, they all played. If one said, Let us go a-walking into the fields, they went all. If it were to go a-hawking or a-hunting, the ladies mounted upon dainty well-paced nags, seated in a stately palfrey saddle, carried on their lovely fists. Miniardly begloved every one of them, either a sparrowhawk or a laneret or a marlin, and the young gallants carried the other kinds of hawks. So nobly were they taught, that there was neither he nor she amongst them but could read, write, sing, play upon several musical instruments, speak 5 or 6 several languages, and compose in them all very quaintly, both in verse and prose. Never were seen so valiant knights, so noble and worthy, so dexterous and skillful both on foot and a-horseback, more brisk and lively, more nimble and quick, or better handling all manner of weapons than were there. Never were seen ladies so proper and handsome, so miniard and dainty, less froward, or more ready with their hand, and with their needle in every honest and free action belonging to that sex, than were there. For this reason, when the time came that any man of the said abbey, either at the request of his parents, or for some other cause, had a mind to go out of it, he carried along with him one of the ladies, namely, her whom he had before that chosen for his mistress, and they were married together. And if they had formerly in the leme lived in good devotion and amity, they did continue therein, and increase it to a greater height in their state of matrimony, and did entertain that mutual love till the very last day of their life, in no less vigor and fervency than at the very day of their wedding. Here must not I forget to set down unto you a riddle which was found under the ground as they were laying the foundation of the abbey, engraven in a copper plate, and it was thus as followeth. Chapter 1.58. A prophetical riddle. Poor mortals, who wait for a happy day, cheer up your hearts, and hear what I shall say. If it be lawful firmly to believe that the celestial bodies can us give wisdom to judge of things that are not yet, or if from heaven such wisdom we may get as may with confidence make us discourse of years to come, their destiny and course. I to my hearers give to understand that this next winter, though it be at hand, yea, and before, there shall appear a race of men who, loth to sit still in one place, shall boldly go before all people's eyes, suborning men of divers qualities to draw them unto covenants and sides, in such a manner that, whate'er betides, they'll move you, if you give them ear, no doubt, with both your friends and kindred to fall out. They'll make a vassal to gainstand his lord, and children their own parents. In a word, all reverence shall then be banished, no true respect to other shall be had. They'll say that every man should have his turn, both in his going forth and his return, and hereupon there shall arise such woes, such jarrings, and confused to's and fro, that never were in history such coils set down as yet, such tumults and garbles. Then shall you many gallant men see by valor stirred up, and youthful fervency, who, trusting too much in their hopeful time, live but a while and perish in their prime. Neither shall any, who this course shall run, leave off the race which he hath once begun, till they the heavens with noise by their contention have filled, and with their steps the earth's dimension. Then those shall have no less authority, that have no faith, than those that will not lie, for all shall be governed by a rude, base, ignorant, and foolish multitude. The veriest loud of all shall be their judge, O horrible and dangerous deluge. Deluge I call it, and that for good reason, for this shall be omitted in no season. Nor shall the earth of this foul stir be free till suddenly you in great store shall see the waters issue out, with whose streams the most moderate of all shall moistened be, and justly too, because they did not spare the flocks of beasts that innocentest are, but did their sinews and their bowels take, not to the gods a sacrifice to make, but usually to serve themselves for sport. And now consider, I do you exhort, in such commotions so continual, what rest can take the globe terrestrial? Most happy then are they that can it hold, and use it carefully as precious gold, by keeping it in jail, whence it shall have no help but him who being to it gave. And to increase his mournful accident, the sun, before it set in Occident, shall cease to dart upon it any light, more than in an eclipse or in the night, so that at once its favor shall be gone, and liberty with it be left alone. And yet, before it come to ruin thus, its quaking shall be as impetuous as Aetna's was when Titan's sons lay under, and yield, when lost, a fearful sound like thunder. Inarim did not more quickly move, when Typhoeus did the vast huge hills remove, and for despite into the sea them threw. Thus shall it then be lost by ways not few, and changed suddenly, when those that have it to other men that after come shall leave it. Then shall it be high time to cease from this so long, so great, so tedious exercise, for the great waters told you now by me, will make each think where his retreat shall be, and yet, before that they be clean dispersed, you may behold in air, where naught was erst, the burning heat of a great flame to rise, lick up the water, and the enterprise. It resteth after those things to declare, that those shall sit content who chosen are, with all good things, and with celestial man and richly recompensed every man, the others at the last all stripped shall be, that after this great work all men may see, how each shall have his due. This is their lot, O he is worthy praise that shrinketh not. No sooner was this enigmatical monument read over, but Gargantua, fetching a very deep sigh, said unto those that stood by, "It is not now only, I perceive, that people called to the faith of the gospel, and convinced with the certainty of evangelical truths, are persecuted. But happy is that man that shall not be scandalized, but shall always continue to the end in aiming at that mark, which God by his dear Son hath set before us, without being distracted or diverted by his carnal affections and depraved nature." The monk then said, "What do you think in your conscience is meant and signified by this riddle?" "What?" said Gargantua the progress, and carrying on of the divine truth. "By Saint Gaudrin," said the monk, "that is not my exposition. It is the style of the prophet Merlin. Make upon it as many grave allegories and glosses as you will, and dote upon it, you and the rest of the world, as long as you please. For my part, I can conceive no other meaning in it but a description of a set at tennis in dark and obscure terms. The suborners of men are the makers of matches, which are commonly friends. After the two chases are made, he that was in the upper end of the tennis court goeth out, and the other cometh in. They believe the first that saith, the ball was over or under the line. The waters are the heats that the players take till they sweat again. The cords of the rackets are made of the guts of sheep or goats. The globe terrestrial is the tennis ball. After playing, when the game is done, they refresh themselves before a clear fire and change their shirts. And very willingly they make all good cheer, but most merrily those that have gained. And so farewell. End Book 1. The second book. For the reader. The reader here may be pleased to take notice that the copy of verses by the title of Rabelais, premise to the first book of this translation, being but a kind of mock poem, in imitation of somewhat lately published, as to any indifferent observer will easily appear, by the false quantities in the Latin, the abusive strain of the English, and extravagant subscription to both, and as such, by a friend of the translator, at the desire of some frolic gentleman of his acquaintance, more for a trial of skill than prejudicacy to any, composed in his jollity to please their fancies, was only ordained to be prefixed to a dozen of books, and no more, thereby to save the labor of transcribing so many as were requisite for satisfying the curiosity of a company of just that number. And that, therefore, the charging of the whole impression with it is merely to be imputed to the negligence of the pressmen, who, receiving it about the latter end of the night, were so eager before the next morning to afford complete books, that, as they began, they went on, without animadverting what was recommended to their discretion. This is hoped will suffice to assure the ingenuous reader that in no treatise of the translator, whether original or translititious, shall willingly be offered the meanest rub to the reputation of any worthy gentleman, and that, however Providence dispose of him, no misfortune shall be able to induce his mind to any complacency in the disparagement of another. Again, the Pentateuch of Rabelais, mentioned in the title page of the first book of this translation being written originally in the French tongue, as it comprehendeth some of its brusquest dialects, with so much ingeniosity and wit that more impressions have been sold thereof in that language than of any other book that hath been set forth at any time within these 1500 years. So difficult nevertheless to be turned into any other speech that many prime spirits in most of the nations of Europe, since the year 1573, which was fourscore years ago, after having attempted it, were constrained with no small regret to give it over as a thing impossible to be done, is now in its translation thus far advanced, and the remainder faithfully undertaken with the same hand to be rendered into English by a person of quality, who, though his lands be sequestered, his house garrisoned, his other goods sold, and himself detained a prisoner of war at London, for his having been at Worcester fight, hath, at the most earnest entreaty of some of his especial friends well acquainted with his inclination to the performance of conducible singularities, promised, besides his version of these two already published, very speedily to offer up unto this Isle of Britain the virginity of the translation of the other three most admirable books of the aforesaid author, provided that by the plurality of judicious and understanding men it be not declared he hath already proceeded too far, or that the continuation of the rigor whereby he is dispossessed of all his both real and personal estate, by pressing too hard upon him, be not an impediment thereto, and to other more eminent undertakings of his, as hath been oftentimes very fully mentioned by the said translator in several original treatises of his own penning. Lately by him so numerously dispersed that there is scarce any, who being skilful in the English idiom, or curious of any new ingenious invention, hath not either read them or heard of them. Mr. Hugh Salel to Rabelais. If profit mixed with pleasure may suffice tea, extol an author's worth above the skies, thou certainly for both must praised be, I know it. For thy judgment hath in the contexture of this book set down such high contentments, mingled with utility, that, as I think, I see Democritus laughing at men as things ridiculous. Insist in thy design, for though we prove ungreat on earth, thy merit is above. The fifth book. The author's prologue. Indefatigable topers, and you, thrice precious martyrs of the smock, give me leave to put a serious question to your worships while you are idly striking your codpieces, and I myself not much better employed. Pray, why is it that people say that men are not such sots nowadays as they were in the days of yore? Sot is an old word that signifies a dunce, dullard, jolthead, gull, whittle, or naughty, one without guts in his brains, whose cockloft is unfurnished, and, in short, a fool. Now would I know whether you would have us understand by this same saying, as indeed you logically may, that formerly men were fools, and in this generation are grown wise. How many and what dispositions made them fools? How many and what dispositions were wanting to make them wise? Why were they fools? How should they be wise? Pray, how came you to know that men were formerly fools? How did you find that they are now wise? Who the devil made em fools? Who a God's name made em wise? Who do you think are most, those that loved mankind foolish, or those that love it wise? How long has it been wise? How long otherwise? Whence proceeded the foregoing folly? Whence the following wisdom? Why did the old folly end now, and no later? Why did the modern wisdom begin now, and no sooner? What were we the worse for the former folly? What the better for the succeeding wisdom? How should the ancient folly be come to nothing? How should this same new wisdom be started up and established? Now answer me, an't please you. I dare not adjure you in stronger terms, reverencers, lest I make your pious fatherly worships in the least uneasy. Come, pluck up a good heart, speak the truth and shame the devil. Be cheery, my lads, and if you are for me, take me off 3 or 5 bumpers of the best, while I make a halt at the first part of the sermon, then answer my question. If you're not for me, avaunt. Avoid Satan. For I swear by my great-grandmother's placket, and that's a horrid oath, that if you don't help me to solve that puzzling problem, I will, nay, I already do repent having proposed it. For still I must remain nettled and gravelled, and a devil a bit I know how to get off. Well, what say you? Faith, I begin to smell you out. You are not yet disposed to give me an answer, nor I neither, by these whiskers. Yet to give some light into the business, I'll e'en tell you what had been anciently foretold in the matter by a venerable doctor, who, being moved by the Spirit in a prophetic vein, wrote a book yclept the Prelatical Bagpipe. What d'ye think the old fornicator saith? Hearken, you old naughties, hearken now or never. The Jubilee's year, when all like fools were shorn, is about 30 supernumerary. O want of veneration! Fools they seemed, but persevering with long breves, at last no more they shall be gaping greedy fools. For they shall shell the shrub's delicious fruit, whose flower they in the spring so much had feared. Now you have it, what do you make on't? The seer is ancient, the style laconic, the sentences dark like those of Scotus, though they treat of matters dark enough in themselves. The best commentators on that good father take the Jubilee after the 30th, to be the years that are included in this present age, till 1550, there being but one Jubilee every 50 years. Men shall no longer be thought fools next green peas season. The fools, whose number, as Solomon certifies, is infinite, shall go to pot like a parcel of mad bedlamites as they are. And all manner of folly shall have an end, that being also numberless, according to Avicenna, maniae infiniti sunt species. Having been driven back and hidden towards the center during the rigor of the winter, teas now to be seen on the surface, and buds out like the trees. This is as plain as a nose in a man's face, you know it by experience, you see it. and it was formerly found out by that great good man Hippocrates, aphorism very etenim maniae, and c. This world therefore wissifying itself, shall no longer dread the flower and blossoms of every coming spring. That is, as you may piously believe, bumper in hand and tears in eyes, in the woeful time of Lent, which used to keep them company. Whole cartloads of books that seemed florid, flourishing, and flowery, gay and gaudy as so many butterflies, but in the main were tiresome, dull, soporiferous, irksome, mischievous, crabbed, naughty, puzzling, and dark as those of whining Heraclitus, as unintelligible as the numbers of Pythagoras, that king of the bean, according to Horace. Those books, I say, have seen their best days and shall soon come to nothing, being delivered to the executing worms and merciless petty chandlers. Such was their destiny, and to this they were predestinated. In their stead beans and cod are started up. That is, these merry and fructifying Pantagruelian books, so much sought nowadays in expectation of the following Jubilees period, to the study of which writings all people have given their minds, and accordingly have gained the name of wise. Now I think I have fairly solved and resolved your problem, then reform, and be the better for it. Hem once or twice like hearts of oak, stand to your pan puddings, and take me off your bumpers, 9 go-downs, and huzzah. Since we're like to have a good vintage, and misers hang themselves. Oh, they will cost me an estate in hempen collars, if fair weather hold. For I hereby promise to furnish them with twice as much as will do their business on free cost, as often as they will take the pains to dance at a rope's end, providently to save charges, to the no small disappointment of the finisher of the law. Now, my friends, that you may put in for a share of this new wisdom, and shake off the antiquated folly this very moment, scratch me out of your scrolls and quite discard the symbol of the old philosopher with the golden thigh, by which he has forbidden you to eat beans. For you may take it for a truth granted among all professors in the science of good eating, that he enjoined you not to taste of them only with the same kind intent that a certain freshwater physician had when he did forbid to Aymer, late lord of Camelodiere, kinsman to the lawyer of that name, the wing of the partridge, the rump of the chicken, and the neck of the pigeon, saying, Alla mala rumpum dubium, colum bonum, pel remota. For the duncical dog-leech was so selfish as to reserve them for his own dainty chops, and allowed his poor patients little more than the bare bones to pick, lest they should overload their squeamish stomachs. To the heathen philosopher succeeded a pack of Capuchins, monks who forbid us the use of beans, that is, Pantagruelian books. They seemed to follow the example of Philoxenus and Gnatho, one of whom was a Sicilian of fulsome memory, the ancient master-builders of their monastic cramgut voluptuousness, who, when some dainty bit was served up at a feast, filthily used to spit on it, that none but their nasty selves might have the stomach to eat of it, though their liquorish chops watered never so much after it. So those hideous, snotty, phthisicky, eavesdropping, musty, moving forms of mortification, both in public and private, curse those dainty books, and like toads spit their venom upon them. Now, though we have in our mother tongue several excellent works in verse and prose, and heaven be praised, but little left of the trash and trumpery stuff of those duncical mumblers of Ave Marys and the barbarous foregoing Gothic age, I have made bold to choose to cheer up and warble my plain ditty, or, as they say, to whistle like a goose among the swans, rather than be thought deaf among so many pretty poets and eloquent orators. And thus I am prouder of acting the clown, or any other underpart, among the many ingenious actors in that noble play, than of herding among those mutes, who, like so many shadows and ciphers, only serve to fill up the house and make up a number, gaping and yawning at the flies, and pricking up their lugs, like so many Arcadian asses, at the striking up of the music, thus silently giving to understand that their fopships are tickled in the right place. Having taken this resolution, I thought it would not be amiss to move my diogenical tub, that you might not accuse me of living without example. See a swarm of our modern poets and orators, your Collinets, Marots, Drowits, Saint Gelais, Salels, Massuls, and many more, who, having commenced masters in Apollo's academy on Mount Parnassus, and drunk brimmers at the Caballan fountain among the 9 merry muses, have raised our vulgar tongue, and made it a noble and everlasting structure. Their works are all Parian marble, alabaster, porphyry, and royal cement. They treat of nothing but heroic deeds, mighty things, grave and difficult matters, and this in a crimson, alamoed, rhetorical style. Their writings are all divine nectar, rich, racy, sparkling, delicate, and luscious wine. Nor does our sex wholly engross this honor. Ladies have had their share of the glory. One of them, of the royal blood of France, whom it were a profanation, but to name here, surprises the age at once by the transcendent and inventive genius in her writings and the admirable graces of her style. Imitate those great examples if you can, for my part one cannot. Everyone you know cannot go to Corinth. When Solomon built the temple, all could not give gold by handfuls. Since then, 'tis not in my power to improve our architecture as much as they, I am e'en resolved to do like Renault of Montauban. I'll wait on the masons, set on the pot for the masons, cook for the stone cutters. And since it was not my good luck to be cut out for one of them, I will live and die the admirer of their divine writings. As for you, little envious prigs, snarling bastards, puny critics, you'll soon have railed your last. Go hang yourselves, and choose you out some well-spread oak, under whose shade you may swing in state, to the admiration of the gaping mob. You shall never want rope enough. While I here solemnly protest before my helicon, in the presence of my 9 mistresses the Muses, that if I live yet the age of a dog, eked out with that of 3 crows, sound wind and limbs, like the old Hebrew captain Moses, Xenophilus the musician, and Demonax the philosopher, by arguments no ways impertinent, and reasons not to be disputed, I will prove, in the teeth of a parcel of brokers and retailers of ancient rhapsodies and such mouldy trash, that our vulgar tongue is not so mean. Silly, inept, poor, barren, and contemptible as they pretend. Nor ought I to be afraid of, I know not what botchers of old threadbare stuff, 100 times clouded up and pieced together. Wretched bunglers that can do nothing but new vamp old rusty saws. Beggarly scavengers that rake even the muddiest canals of antiquity for scraps and bits of Latin as insignificant as they are often uncertain. Beseeching our grandees of Whitland that, as when formerly Apollo had distributed all the treasures of his poetical exchequer to his favorites, little hulchbacked Aesop got for himself the office of apologue monger. In the same manner, since I do not aspire higher, they would not deny me that of puny riperographer or riffraff follower of the sect of Pyrrhacus. I dare swear they will grant me this, for they are all so kind, so good-natured, and so generous that they'll ne'er boggle at so small a request. Therefore, both dry and hungry souls, pot and trenchermen, fully enjoying those books, perusing, quoting them in their merry conventicles, and observing the great mysteries of which they treat, shall gain a singular profit and fame. As in the like case was done by Alexander the Great with the books of prime philosophy composed by Aristotle. O rare! Belly on belly! What swillers, what twisters will there be? Then be sure all you that take care not to die of the pip, be sure, I say, you take my advice, and stock yourselves with good store of such books as soon as you meet with them at the booksellers. And do not only shell those beans, but e'en swallow them down like an opiate cordial, and let them be in you. I say, let them be within you. Then you shall find, my beloved, what good they do to all clever shellers of beans. Here is a good handsome basketful of them, which I here lay before your worships. They were gathered in the very individual garden whence the former came. So I beseech you, reverencers, with as much respect as was ever paid by dedicating author, to accept of the gift, in hopes of somewhat better against next visit the swallows give us. Chapter 2I. Of the original and antiquity of the great Pantagruel. It will not be an idle nor unprofitable thing, seeing we are at leisure, to put you in mind of the fountain and original source whence is derived unto us the good Pantagruel. For I see that all good historiographers have thus handled their chronicles, not only the Arabians, barbarians, and Latins, but also the gentle Greeks, who were eternal drinkers. You must therefore remark that at the beginning of the world I speak of a long time. It is above 40 quarantaines, or 40 times 40 nights, according to the supputation of the ancient Druids a little after that Abel was killed by his brother Cain. The earth, imbrued with the blood of the just, was 1 year so exceeding fertile in all those fruits which it usually produceth to us, and especially in medlars, that ever since throughout all ages it hath been called the year of the great medlars. For 3 of them did fill a bushel. In it the kalends were found by the Grecian almanacs. There was that year nothing of the month of March in the time of Lent, and the middle of August was in May. In the month of October, as I take it, or at least September, that I may not err, for I will carefully take heed of that, was the week so famous in the annals, which they call the week of the 3 Thursdays. For it had 3 of them by means of their irregular leap years, called bisextiles, occasioned by the sun's having tripped and stumbled a little towards the left hand, like a debtor afraid of sergeants, coming right upon him to arrest him. And the moon varied from her course above 5 fathom, and there was manifestly seen the motion of trepidation in the firmament of the fixed stars, called a planes, so that the middle Pleiad, leaving her fellows, declined towards the equinoctial, and the star named Spica left the constellation of the Virgin to withdraw herself towards the balance, known by the name of Libra, which are cases very terrible, and matters so hard and difficult that astrologians cannot set their teeth in them. And indeed, their teeth had been pretty long if they could have reached thither. However, account you it for a truth that everybody then did most heartily eat of these medlars, for they were fair to the eye and in taste delicious. But even as Noah, that holy man, to whom we are so much beholding, bound, and obliged, for that he planted to us the vine, from whence we have that nectarian, delicious, precious, heavenly, joyful, and deific liquor which they call the piet or tipplage, was deceived in the drinking of it, for he was ignorant of the great virtue and power thereof. So likewise the men and women of that time did delight much in the eating of that fair great fruit, but divers and very different accidents did ensue thereupon. For there fell upon them all in their bodies a most terrible swelling, but not upon all in the same place. For some were swollen in the belly, and their bellies strouted out big like a great tun, of whom it is written, ventrum omnipotentem, who were all very honest men, and merry blades. And of this race came Saint Fatgulch and Shrove Tuesday, Pansart, Mardigras. Others did swell at the shoulders, who in that place were so crump and knobby that they were therefore called montifers, which is as much to say as hill carriers, of whom you see some yet in the world, of divers sexes and degrees. Of this race came Aesop, some of whose excellent words and deeds you have in writing. Some other puffs did swell in length by the member which they call the laborer of nature, in such sort that it grew marvelous long, fat, great, lusty, stirring, and crestrizen, in the antique fashion, so that they made use of it as of a girdle, winding it 5 or 6 times about their waist. But if it happened the foresaid member to be in good case, spooming with a full sail bunt fair before the wind, then to have seen those strouting champions, you would have taken them for men that had their lances settled on their rest to run at the ring or tilting windtam, Quinton. Of these, believe me, the race is utterly lost and quite extinct, as the women say, for they do lament continually that there are none extant now of those great, and see. You know the rest of the song. Others did grow in matter of ballocks, so enormously, that 3 of them would well fill a sack able to contain 5 quarters of wheat. From them are descended the ballocks of Lorraine, which never dwell in codpieces, but fall down to the bottom of the breeches. Others grew in the legs, and to see them you would have said they had been cranes, or the reddish long-billed stork-like scrank-legged sea-fowls called flamins, or else men walking upon stilts or scatches. The little grammar school boys, known by the name of grimos, called those leg-grown slangams jambus, in allusion to the French word jambe, which signifieth a leg. In others their nose did grow so, that it seemed to be the beak of a limbeck, in every part thereof most variously diapered with the twinkling sparkles of crimson blisters budding forth, and purpled with pimples all enamelled with thick-set wheels of a sanguine colour, bordered with gules. And such have you seen the canon or prebend Panzolt, and Woodenfoot, the physician of Angiers. Of which race there were few that looked the tisane, but all of them were perfect lovers of the pure septembral juice. Naso and Ovid had their extraction from thence, and all those of whom it is written, ni reminiscaris. Others grew in ears, which they had so big that out of one would have been stuff enough got to make a doublet, a pair of breeches, and a jacket, whilst with the other they might have covered themselves as with a Spanish cloak, and they say that in Bourbonnois this race remaineth yet. Others grew in length of body, and of those came the giants, and of them Pantagruel. And the first was Chalbroth, who begat Sarabroth, who begat Farabroth, who begat Hurtali, that was a brave eater of pottage and reigned in the time of the flood, who begat Nembroth, who begat Atlas, that with his shoulders kept the sky from falling, who begat Goliah, who begat Eryx, that invented the hocus-pocus plays of legerdemain, who begat Titius, who begat Arion, who begat Polyphemus, who begat Cacus, who begat Edion, the first man that ever had the pox, for not drinking fresh in summer, as Bardachin witnesseth, who begat Enceladus, who begat Zeus, who begat Typhius, who begat Elias, who begat Othus, who begat Aegon, who begat Briareus, that had 100 hands, who begat Porphyrio, who begat Adamastor, who begat Antaeus, who begat Agatho, who begat Porus, against whom fought Alexander the Great, who begat Aranthes, who begat Gabara, that was the first inventor of the drinking of healths, who begat Goliah of Secondil, who begat Ophat, that was terribly well-nosed for drinking at the barrel-head, who begat Artachius, who begat Oromdan, who begat Gemagog, the first inventor of Poulan shoes, which are open on the foot and tied over the instep with a lashet, who begat Sisyphus, who begat the Titans, of whom Hercules was born, who begat Aeneas, the most skillful man that ever was in matter of taking the little worms, called sirens, out of the hands, who begat Fierabras, that was vanquished by Oliver, peer of France and Roland's comrade, who begat Morgan, the first in the world that played at dice with spectacles, who begat Fracasius, of whom Merlin Cocius hath written, and of him was born Ferragus, who begat Hapmauch, the first that ever invented the drying of neats' tongues in the chimney. For before that, people salted them as they do now gammons of bacon, who begat Bolivorax, who begat Longies, who begat Gaiopho, whose ballocks were of poplar, and his PR. Of the service or sorb apple tree, who begat Mashaphane, who begat Bruslefer, who begat Angulevant, who begat Galehout, the inventor of flagons, who begat Meyerlingout, who begat Galliffer, who begat Falardin, who begat Robost, who begat Sordabrin of Conimbers, who begat Brushant of Mamiere, who begat Briar that was overcome by Augier the Dane, peer of France, who begat Mabrun, who begat Fautesnin, who begat Haquelebec, who begat Vitdegrain, who begat Grangasier, who begat Gargantua, who begat the noble Pantagruel, my master. I know that, reading this passage, you will make a doubt within yourselves, and that grounded upon very good reason, which is this: how it is possible that this relation can be true, seeing at the time of the flood all the world was destroyed, except Noah and 7 persons more with him in the ark, into whose number her tally is not admitted. Doubtless the demand is well made and very apparent, but the answer shall satisfy you, or my wit is not rightly cocked. And because I was not at that time to tell you anything of my own fancy, I will bring unto you the authority of the Massorets, good honest fellows, true Balakiring blades and exact Hebraical bagpipers, who affirm that verily the said Hurtali was not within the ark of Noah, neither could he get in, for he was too big, but he sat astride upon it, with one leg on the one side and another on the other, as little children used to do upon their wooden horses. Or as the great bull of Bern, which was killed at Marinian, did ride for his hackney the great murdering piece called the cannon pevier, a pretty beast of a fair and pleasant amble without all question. In that posture, he, after God, saved the said ark from danger, for with his legs he gave it the brangle that was needful, and with his foot turned it whither he pleased, as a ship answereth her rudder. Those that were within sent him up victuals in abundance by a chimney, as people very thankfully acknowledging the good that he did them. And sometimes they did talk together as Icaromnippus did to Jupiter, according to the report of Lucian. Have you understood all this well? Drink then one good draught without water, for if you believe it not, no truly do I not, quoth she. Chapter 2.2 Of the Nativity of the most dread and redoubted Pantagruel. Gargantua at the age of 440 and 4 years begat his son Pantagruel, upon his wife named Badebec, daughter to the king of the Amorites in Utopia, who died in childbirth. For he was so wonderfully great and lumpish that he could not possibly come forth into the light of the world without thus suffocating his mother. But that we may fully understand the cause and reason of the name of Pantagruel, which at his baptism was given him, you are to remark that in that year there was so great drought over all the country of Africa that there passed 36 months, 3 weeks, 4 days, 13 hours, and a little more without rain, but with a heat so vehement that the whole earth was parched and withered by it. Neither was it more scorched and dried up with heat in the days of Elijah than it was at that time, for for there was not a tree to be seen that had either leaf or bloom upon it. The grass was without verdure or greenness, the rivers were drained, the fountains dried up, the poor fishes, abandoned and forsaken by their proper element, wandering and crying upon the ground most horribly. The birds did fall down from the air for want of moisture, and dew wherewith to refresh them. The wolves, foxes, harts, wild boars, fallow deer, hares, conies, weasels, brocks, badgers, and other such beasts, were found dead in the fields with their mouths open. In respect of men, there was the pity. You should have seen them lay out their tongues like hares that have been run 6 hours. Many did throw themselves into the wells. Others entered within a cow's belly to be in the shade, those Homer calls alibants. All the country was idle, and could do no virtue. It was a most lamentable case to have seen the labor of mortals in defending themselves from the vehemency of this horrific drought, for they had work enough to do to save the holy water in the churches from being wasted. But there was such order taken by the council of my lords the cardinals and of our holy father, that none did dare to take above 1 lick. Yet when anyone came into the church, you should have seen above 20 poor thirsty fellows hang upon him that was the distributor of the water, and that with a wide open throat, gaping for some little drop, like the rich glutton in Luke, that might fall by, lest anything should be lost. Oh, how happy was he in that year who had a cool cellar underground, well plenished with fresh wine. The philosopher reports, in moving the question, wherefore it is that the sea water is salt, that at the time when Phoebus gave the government of his resplendent chariot to his son Phaeton, the said Phaeton, unskillful in the art, and not knowing how to keep the ecliptic line betwixt the 2 tropics of the latitude of the sun's course, strayed out of his way, and came so near the earth that he dried up all the countries that were under it, burning a great part of the heavens, which the philosophers call Via Lactea. And the Huffsnuffs St. James's Way, although the most coped, lofty, and high-crested poets affirm that to be the place where Juno's milk fell when she gave suck to Hercules. The earth at that time was so excessively heated that it fell into an enormous sweat, yea, such a one as made it sweat out the sea, which is therefore salt, because all sweat is salt. And this you cannot but confess to be true if you will taste of your own, or of those that have the pox, when they are put into sweating, it is all one to me. Just such another case fell out this same year. For on a certain Friday, when the whole people were bent upon their devotions, and had made goodly processions, with store of litanies, and fair preachings, and beseechings of God Almighty to look down with his eye of mercy upon their miserable and disconsolate condition, there was even then visibly seen issue out of the ground great drops of water, such as fall from a puff-bagged man in a top sweat, and the poor hoydens began to rejoice as if it had been a thing very profitable unto them. For some said that there was not 1 drop of moisture in the air whence they might have any rain, and that the earth did supply the default of that. Other learned men said that it was a shower of the antipodes, as Seneca saith in his 4th book Questionum Naturalium, speaking of the source and spring of Nilus. But they were deceived, for the procession being ended, when everyone went about to gather of this dew, and to drink of it with full bowls, they found that it was nothing but pickle and the very brine of salt, more brackish in taste than the saltest water of the sea. And because in that very day Pantagruel was born, his father gave him that name. For Panta in Greek is as much to say as all, and gruel in the Hagaran language doth signify thirsty, inferring hereby that at his birth the whole world was a dry and thirsty, as likewise foreseeing that he would be some day supreme lord and sovereign of the thirsty Ethrapels, which was shown to him at that very same hour by a more evident sign. For when his mother Badebec was in the bringing of him forth, and that the midwives did wait to receive him, there came first out of her belly 68 trigoneers, that is, salt sellers, every one of them leading in a halter a mule heavy laden with salt. After whom issued forth 9 dromedaries, with great loads of gammons of bacon and dried neats tongues on their backs. Then followed 7 camels loaded with links and chitlins, hogs, puddings, and sausages. After them came out 5 great wains, full of leeks, garlic, onions, and chibots, drawn with 35 strong cart horses, which was 6 for every one besides the tiller. At the sight hereof the said midwives were much amazed, yet some of them said, Lo, here is good provision, and indeed we need it. For we drink but lazily, as if our tongues walked on crutches, and not lustily like landsmen Dutches. Truly this is a good sign. There is nothing here but what is fit for us. These are the spurs of wine, that set it a-going. As they were tattling thus together, after their own manner of chat, behold, out comes Pantagruel all hairy like a bear, whereupon one of them, inspired with a prophetical spirit, said, "This will be a terrible fellow. He is born with all his hair. He is undoubtedly to do wonderful things, and if he live, he shall have age." Chapter 2.3 Of the grief wherewith Gargantua was moved at the decease of his wife Badebec. When Pantagruel was born, there was none more astonished and perplexed than was his father Gargantua. For of the one side seeing his wife Badebec dead, and on the other side his son Pantagruel born, so fair and so great, he knew not what to say nor what to do. And the doubt that troubled his brain was to know whether he should cry for the death of his wife, or laugh for the joy of his son. He was hink into choked with sophistical arguments, for he framed them very well in modo et figura, but he could not resolve them, remaining pestered and entangled by this means, like a mouse caught in a trap or kite snared in a gin. "Shall I weep?" said he. "Yes, for why? My so good wife is dead, who was the most this, the most that ever was in the world. Never shall I see her, never shall I recover such another. It is unto me an inestimable loss. O my good God, what had I done that thou shouldest thus punish me? Why didst thou not take me away before her, seeing for me to live without her is but to languish? Ah, Badebec, Badebec, my minion, my dear heart, my sugar, my sweeting, my honey, my little sea, yet it had in circumference full 6 acres, 3 rods, 5 poles, 4 yards, 2 foot, 1 inch and a half of good woodland measure. My tender Peggy, my codpiece darling, my bob and hit, my slipshoe lovey, never shall I see thee. Ah, poor Pantagruel, thou hast lost thy good mother, thy sweet nurse, thy well-beloved lady. O false death, how injurious and despiteful hast thou been to me! How malicious and outrageous have I found thee in taking her from me, my well-beloved wife, to whom immortality did of right belong." With these words he did cry like a cow, but on a sudden fell a-laughing like a calf, when Pantagruel came into his mind. "Ha, my little son," said he, "my childalally, fedlifondi, danlichucky, my balacky, my pretty rogue. Oh, how jolly thou art, and how much am I bound to my gracious God, that hath been pleased to bestow on me a son so fair, so spriteful, so lively, so smiling, so pleasant, and so gentle. Ho, 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 how glad I am. Let us drink, ho, and put away melancholy. Bring of the best, rinse the glasses, lay the cloth, drive out these dogs, blow this fire, light candles, shut that door there, cut this bread in sippets for brewies, send away these poor folks in giving them what they ask, hold my gown. I will strip myself into my doublet en cuipo, to make the gossips merry, and keep them company." As he spake this, he heard the litanies and the mementos of the priests that carried his wife to be buried, upon which he left the good purpose he was in, and was suddenly ravished another way, saying, "Lord God, must I again contrist myself? This grieves me. I am no longer young, I grow old, the weather is dangerous. I may perhaps take an ague, then shall I be foiled, if not quite undone. By the faith of a gentleman, it were better to cry less and drink more. My wife is dead, well by G. De Jurandi, I shall not raise her again by my crying. She is well, she is in paradise at least, if she be no higher. She prayeth to God for us, she is happy, she is above the sense of our miseries, nor can our calamities reach her. What though she be dead, must not we also die? The same debt which she hath paid hangs over our heads. Nature will require it of us, and we must all of us some day taste of the same sauce. Let her pass then, and the Lord preserve the survivors, for I must now cast about how to get another wife. But I will tell you what you shall do, said he to the midwives, in France called wise women, where be they good folks. I cannot see them. Go you to my wife's interment, and I will the while rock my son, for I find myself somewhat altered and distempered, and should otherwise be in danger of falling sick. But drink one good draught first, you will be the better for it. And believe me, upon mine honor, they at his request went to her burial and funeral obsequies. In the meanwhile, poor Gargantua staying at home, and willing to have somewhat in remembrance of her to be engraven upon her tomb, made this epitaph in the manner as followeth. Dead is the noble Badebec, who had a face like a Rebecca a Spanish body and a belly of Switzerland. She died, I tell ye, in childbirth. Pray to God, that her he pardon wherein she did err. Here lies her body, which did lie free from all vice, as I believe, and did decease at my bedside, the year and day in which she died. Chapter 2.4 Of the Infancy of Pantagruel. I find by the ancient historiographers and poets that divers have been born in this world after very strange manners, which would be too long to repeat. Read therefore the 7th chapter of Pliny, if you have so much leisure. Yet have you never heard of any so wonderful as that of Pantagruel, for it is a very difficult matter to believe, how in the little time he was in his mother's belly he grew both in body and strength. That which Hercules did was nothing, when in his cradle he slew 2 serpents, for those serpents were but little and weak. But Pantagruel, being yet in the cradle, did far more admirable things, and more to be amazed at. Pass by here the relation of how at every one of his meals he supped up the milk of 4,600 cows, and how, to make him a skillet to boil his milk in, there were set a work all the braziers of Saumur in Anjou, of Villedieu in Normandy, and of Bramont in Lorraine. And they served in this white pot meat to him in a huge great bell, which is yet to be seen in the city of Bourges in Berry, near the palace. But his teeth were already so well grown, and so strengthened with vigor, that of the said bell he bit off a great morsel, as very plainly doth appear till this hour. One day in the morning, when they would have made him suck one of his cows, for he never had any other nurse. As the history tells us, he got one of his arms loose from the swaddling bands wherewith he was kept fast in the cradle, laid hold on the said cow under the left foreham, and grasping her to him ate up her udder and half of her paunch, with the liver and the kidneys, and had devoured all up if she had not cried out most horribly, as if the wolves had held her by the legs. At which noise company came in, and took away the said cow from Pantagruel. Yet could they not so well do it, but that the quarter whereby he caught her was left in his hand, of which quarter he gulped up the flesh in a trice, even with as much ease as you would eat a sausage, and that so greedily with desire of more, that, when they would have taken away the bone from him, he swallowed it down whole, as a cormorant would do a little fish. And afterwards began fumblingly to say, good, 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 for he could not yet speak plain, giving them to understand thereby that he had found it very good, and that he did lack but so much more. Which when they saw that attended him, they bound him with great cable ropes, like those that are made at Tain for the carriage of salt to Lyon, or such as those are whereby the great French ship rides at anchor in the road of Newhaven in Normandy. But, on a certain time, a great bear, which his father had bred, got loose, came towards him, began to lick his face. For his nurses had not thoroughly wiped his chaps, at which unexpected approach being on a sudden offended, he as lightly rid himself of those great cables as Samson did of the hawser ropes wherewith the Philistines had tied him, and by your leave takes me up my lord the bear, and tears him to you in pieces like a pullet, which served him for a gorgeful or good warm bit for that meal. Whereupon Gargantua, fearing lest the child should hurt himself, caused 4 great chains of iron to be made to bind him, and so many strong wooden arches unto his cradle, most firmly stocked and morticed in huge frames. Of those chains you have one at Rochelle, which they draw up at night betwixt the 2 great towers of the haven. Another is at Lyonne third at Angers, and the 4th was carried away by the devils to bind Lucifer, who broke his chains in those days by reason of a colic that did extraordinarily torment him, taken with eating a sergeant's soul fried for his breakfast. And therefore you may believe that which Nicholas de Lyra saith upon that place of the Psalter where it is written, Et aug regem basin, that the said aug, being yet little, was so strong and robustious, that they were fain to bind him with chains of iron in his cradle. Thus continued Pantagruel for a while very calm and quiet, for he was not able so easily to break those chains, especially having no room in the cradle to give a swing with his arms. But see what happened once upon a great holiday, that his father Gargantua made a sumptuous banquet to all the princes of his court. I am apt to believe that the menial officers of the house were so embusied in waiting each on his proper service at the feast, that nobody took care of poor Pantagruel, who was left auriculorum, behindhand, all alone, and as forsaken. What did he? Hark what he did, good people. He strove and essayed to break the chains of the cradle with his arms, but could not, for they were too strong for him. Then did he keep with his feet such a stamping stir, and so long, that at last he beat out the lower end of his cradle, which notwithstanding was made of a great post 5 foot in square. And as soon as he had gotten out his feet, he slid down as well as he could till he had got his soles to the ground. And then with a mighty force he rose up, carrying his cradle upon his back, bound to him like a tortoise that crawls up against a wall. And to have seen him, you would have thought it had been a great carrack of 500 tons upon one end. In this manner he entered into the great hall where they were banqueting, and that very boldly, which did much affright the company. Yet, because his arms were tied in, he could not reach anything to eat, but with great pains stooped now, and then a little to take with the whole flat of his tongue some lick, good bit, or morsel. Which when his father saw, he knew well enough that they had left him without giving him anything to eat, and therefore commanded that he should be loosed from the said chains, by the counsel of the princes and lords there present. Besides that also the physicians of Gargantua said that, if they did thus keep him in the cradle, he would be all his lifetime subject to the stone. When he was unchained, they made him to sit down, where, after he had fed very well, he took his cradle and broke it into more than 500,000 pieces with one blow of his fist that he struck in the midst of it, swearing that he would never come into it again. Chapter 2.5 Of the acts of the noble Pantagruel in his youthful age. Thus grew Pantagruel from day to day, and to everyone's eye waxed more and more in all his dimensions, which made his father to rejoice by a natural affection. Therefore caused he to be made for him, whilst he was yet little, a pretty crossbow wherewith to shoot at small birds, which now they call the great crossbow at Chantel. Then he sent him to the school to learn, and to spend his youth in virtue. In the prosecution of which design he came first to Poictiers, where, as he studied and profited very much, he saw that the scholars were oftentimes at leisure and knew not how to bestow their time, which moved him to take such compassion on them, that one day he took from a long ledge of rocks, called their Passalerden, a huge great stone, of about 12 fathoms square and 14 handfuls thick, and with great ease set it upon 4 pillars in the midst of a field. To no other end but that the said scholars, when they had nothing else to do, might pass their time in getting up on that stone, and feast it with store of gammons, pasties, and flagons, and carve their names upon it with a knife, in token of which deed till this hour the stone is called the lifted stone. And in remembrance hereof there is none entered into the register and matricular book of the said university, or accounted capable of taking any degree therein, till he have first drunk in the Caballine fountain of Croustels, passed at Passalerden, and got up upon the lifted stone. Afterwards, reading the delectable chronicles of his ancestors, he found that Geoffrey of Lusignan, called Geoffrey with the great tooth, grandfather to the cousin-in-law of the eldest sister of the aunt of the son-in-law of the uncle of the good daughter of his stepmother, was interred at Malazais. Therefore one day he took Campos, which is a little vacation from study to play a while, that he might give him a visit as unto an honest man. And going from Poictiers with some of his companions, they passed by the Guge, Leguge, visiting the noble abbot Ardelin, then by Lusignan, by Sansay, by Cels, by Coulanges, by Fontenay-le-Comte, saluting the learned Turquois, and from thence arrived at Malazais, where he went to see the sepulchre of the said Geoffrey with the great tooth, which made him somewhat afraid, looking upon the picture, whose lively draughts did set him forth in the representation of a man in an extreme fury, drawing his great Malchus falchion half-way out of his scabbard. When the reason hereof was demanded, the canons of the said place told him that there was no other cause of it but that pictoribus ac poetes. And see, that is to say, that painters and poets have liberty to paint and devise what they list after their own fancy. But he was not satisfied with their answer, and said, he is not thus painted without a cause, and I suspect that at his death there was some wrong done him, whereof he requireth his kindred to take revenge. I will inquire further into it, and then do what shall be reasonable. Then he returned not to Poictiers, but would take a view of the other universities of France. Therefore, going to Rochelle, he took shipping and arrived at Bordeaux, where he found no great exercise. Only now and then he would see some mariners and lightermen a-wrestling on the quay or strand by the riverside. From thence he came to Toulouse, where he learned to dance very well, and to play with the two-handed sword, as the fashion of the scholars of the said university is to bestir themselves in games whereof they may have their hands full. But he stayed not long there, when he saw that they did cause burn their regents alive like red herring, saying, Now God forbid that I should die this death. For I am by nature sufficiently dry already, without heating myself any further. He went then to Montpellier, where he met with the good wives of Meyervox, and good jovial company withal, and thought to have set himself to the study of physic. But he considered that that calling was too troublesome and melancholic, and that physicians did smell of glisters like old devils. Therefore he resolved he would study the laws. But seeing that there were but 3 scald and 1 bald-pated legist in that place, he departed from thence, and in his way made the bridge of Guard and the amphitheatre of Nimes in less than 3 hours, which, nevertheless, seems to be a more divine than human work. After that he came to Avignon, where he was not above 3 days before he fell in love. For the women there take great delight in playing at the close buttock game, because it is papal ground. Which his tutor and pedagogue Epistemon perceiving, he drew him out of that place, and brought him to Valence in the Dauphiny, where he saw no great matter of recreation, only that the lubbers of the town did beat the scholars, which so incensed him with anger, that when, upon a certain very fair Sunday, the people being at their public dancing in the streets, and one of the scholars offering to put himself into the ring to partake of that sport, the foresaid lubberly fellows would not permit him the admittance into their society. He, taking the scholars' part, so belabored them with blows, and laid such load upon them, that he drove them all before him, even to the brink of the river Rhone, and would have there drowned them, but that they did squat to the ground, and there lay close a full half-league under the river. The whole is to be seen there yet. After that he departed from thence, and in 3 strides and 1 leap came to Angiers, where he found himself very well, and would have continued there some space, but that the plague drove them away. So from thence he came to Bourges, where he studied a good long time, and profited very much in the faculty of the laws, and would sometimes say that the books of the civil law were like unto a wonderfully precious, royal, and triumphant robe of cloth of gold edged with dirt. For in the world are no goodlier books to be seen, more ornate, nor more eloquent than the texts of the Pandects, but the bordering of them, that is to say, the gloss of a Curtius, is so scurvy, vile, base, and unsavory, that it is nothing but filthiness and villainy. Going from Bourges, he came to Orleans, where he found store of swaggering scholars that made him great entertainment at his coming, and with whom he learned to play at tennis so well that he was a master at that game. For the students of the said place make a prime exercise of it, and sometimes they carried him unto Cupid's houses of commerce, in that city termed islands, because of their being most ordinarily environed with other houses, and not contiguous to any, there to recreate his person at the sport of Pausavant, which the wenches of London call the firkers in and in. As for breaking his head with overmuch study, he had an especial care not to do it in any case, for fear of spoiling his eyes. Which he the rather observed, for that it was told him by one of his teachers, they're called regents, that the pain of the eyes was the most hurtful thing of any to the sight. For this cause, when he one day was made a licentiate, or graduate in law, one of the scholars of his acquaintance, who of learning had not much more than his burden, though instead of that he could dance very well and play at tennis, made the blazon and device of the licentiates in the said university, saying, So you have in your hand a racket, a tennis ball in your cod placket, a pandect law in your cap's tippet, and that you have the skill to trip it in a low dance, you will be allowed the grant of the licentiate's hood. Chapter 2.6 How Pantagruel met with a Limousin, who too affectedly did counterfeit the French language. Upon a certain day, I know not when, Pantagruel walking after supper with some of his fellow students without that gate of the city through which we enter on the road to Paris, encountered with a young spruce-like scholar that was coming upon the same very way, and after they had saluted one another, asked him thus, My friend, from whence comest thou now? The scholar answered him, From the Almy, Inclite, and Celebrate Academy, which is vocitated Lutetia. What is the meaning of this? Said Pantagruel to one of his men. It is, answered he, from Paris. Thou comest from Paris then, said Pantagruel, and how do you spend your time there, you my masters the students of Paris? The scholar answered, We transfridate the sequin at the dilicule and crepuscule. We deambulate by the compites and quadrives of the herb. We dispumate the latial verbicination. And, like verisimilary amorabins, we captet the benevolence of the omnijugal, omniform, and omnigenal feminine sex. Upon certain dicules, we invisat the lupinaires, and in a Venerian ecstasy, inculcate our vereters into the penitissime recesses of the pudens of these amicabilissime meretricules. Then do we coponisate in the meritory taberns of the pineapple, the castle, the Magdalene, and the mule, goodly vervicine spatules perforaminated with petricile. And if by fortune there be rarity or penury of pecune in our marsuppies, and that they be exhausted of ferrugineian metal, for the shot we dimit our codices and opinorat our vestments, whilst we prestillate the coming of the tabullaries from the Penates and patriotic lares. To which Pantagruel answered, What devilish language is this? By the Lord, I think thou art some kind of heretic. My lord, no, said the scholar. For libentissimile, as soon as it elucesseth any minutal slice of the day, I demigrate into one of these so well architected minsters, and there, irrorating myself with fair lustral water, I mumble off little parcels of some mysic precation of our sacrificals, and, submurmurating my horary precules, I elevate and upsturge my anime from its nocturnal inclinations. I revere the Olympicals. I latrially vener the supernal astropotent. I dilige and redeem my proxims. I observe the decalogical precepts, and, according to the facultatule of my viers, I do not decede from them one late unguicule. Nevertheless, it is veriform, that because Mammona doth not supergurgitate anything in my locals, that I am somewhat rare, and lent to supererogate the Elemosynes to those agents that hostilely quiritate their stipe. Prut tut, said Pantagruel, what doth this fool mean to say? I think he is upon the forging of some diabolical tongue, and that enchanter-like he would charm us. To whom one of his men said, Without doubt, sir, this fellow would counterfeit the language of the Parisians, but he doth only flay the Latin, imagining by so doing that he doth highly pindarize it in most eloquent terms, and strongly conceiteth himself to be therefore a great orator in the French, because he disdaineth the common manner of speaking. To which Pantagruel said, Is it true? The scholar answered, My worshipful lord, my genie is not aptnate to that which this flagitious nebulin saith, to excoriate the cut, ike, Yule of our vernacular Gallic, but vice versally I knave oper, and by veals and rams enite to locuplidate it with the Latinicum redundance. By G, said Pantagruel, I will teach you to speak. But first come hither, and tell me whence thou art. To this the scholar answered, The primeval origin of my aves and adhaves was indigenary of the Lemuvic regions, where requiesceth the corpor of the Hagiotet Saint Martial. I understand thee very well, said Pantagruel. When all comes to all, thou art a Limousin, and thou wilt here by thy affected speech counterfeit the Parisians. Well now, come hither, I must show thee a new trick, and handsomely give thee the comfit. With this he took him by the throat, saying to him, Thou flayest the Latin. By St. John, I will make thee flay the fox, for I will now flay thee alive. Then began the poor Limousin to cry, Ha, guid master. Ha, Lord my help, and St. Marcia. Ha, I'm worried. Ha, my thropple, the bean of my crag is bruck. Ha, forgoed seclot my lean master, wah, wah, wah. Now, said Pantagruel, thou speakest naturally, and so let him go. For the poor Limousin had totally bewrayed and thoroughly conshit his breeches, which were not deep and large enough, but round, straight, canyoned gregs, having in the seat a piece like a keeling's tail, and therefore in French called de chausse a queue de merlis. Then, said Pantagruel, St. Alipantin, what sive? Fie! To the devil with this turnipeter, as he stinks. And so let him go. But this hug of Pantagruel's was such a terror to him all the days of his life, and took such deep impression in his fancy, that very often, distracted with sudden affrightments, he would startle and say that Pantagruel held him by the neck. Besides that, it procured him a continual drought and desire to drink, so that after some few years he died of the death Roland, in plain English called thirst, a work of divine vengeance, showing us that which saith the philosopher and Aulus Gellius, that it becometh us to speak according to the common language, and that we should, as said Octavian Augustus, strive to shun all strange and unknown terms with as much heedfulness and circumspection as pilots of ships use to avoid the rocks and banks in the sea.